Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm watching over here on Fox News, and we're getting our daily dose of booga booga. They have been hammering for the last hour this new ISIS video showing how they're building all these horrible terror weapons that they're going to come and get you with, blah, 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 blah. There's a new star of the ISIS Rita Katz videos. They're calling him the new Jihadi John, because supposedly the old Jihadi John was killed, but can't let a good catch name go to waste, so we have a new Jihadi John with a British accent. Very obvious British accent here, and they're putting out this video saying, see, ISIS is bad, ISIS is coming to get you, we've got to fight ISIS. They're trying to counter the growing public awareness that the U.S. created and trained and supported ISIS. We're smuggling weapons to them from Libya through the consulate in Benghazi. That's what that whole big situation was all about. We have declassified U.S. government documents confirming the U.S. government encouraged the creation of ISIS to use as a proxy to redraw the map of the Middle East. Now, things are not going very good for the U.S. assets in Syria, because apparently these various terrorist factions are starting to attack each other. Apparently ISIS is now having combat with al-Nusra. So I'm sure Putin and Assad are laughing their heads off over this, that they're turning on each other. Now, over in Iraq, with the U.S. now basically on a leash and not able to run interference anymore, Iraq forces are steadily gaining ground against ISIS. ISIS has lost 40% of the land they were in control of at their maximum point of expansion. They're on the verge of losing Ramadi, and we are getting reports from Iraq that ISIS, Daesh, I wish they'd settle on one name, has been executing Iraqi civilians in Ramadi as they retreat. Probably something those civilians know that they don't want to get out into the public, like they're all talking English or some other language that would be embarrassing. Now, up in Luhansk, as you may be aware, the Russian Orthodox Church celebrates Christmas on a different day from pretty much the rest of the world. And it's currently their Christmas right now. And Luhansk, in honor of Christmas, has just released all of the Ukrainian POWs they are holding. Get on out of here, go home to your families. Merry Christmas. Now, Donetsk and Luhansk had offered Kiev a prisoner exchange in honor of Christmas. Kiev turned it down. But Luhansk went ahead and released them anyway. Now, the big news is today that North Korea has announced they've tested a small-scale hydrogen bomb, multi-stage thermonuclear device. And we're seeing all these reports about, oh, it's really not that kind of a big deal. We don't need to be afraid and all the rest of it. But the impact from this underground test registered as a 5.1 earthquake on seismographs. That's a big wallop. So right now, the United Nations Security Council is working on a response to this latest nuclear test, more sanctions and so forth and so on. But while I have doubts about North Korea's leadership's collective sanity, I can understand with the U.S. invading country after country after country to steal their mineral wealth and their assets. The countries might want to arm themselves, because nuclear weapons are really deterrent weapons. You don't go on the offense against another country with a nuclear weapon, because after you've used it, there really isn't anything worth having where you use that weapon. Iran's desire for nuclear weapons is as a deterrent. to not be invaded at some point. Iran has not invaded another country in 200 years, and certainly not since the 1979 revolution that threw out the U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah. The reason the U.S. and Israel do not want Iran to have nuclear weapons is because they're planning on invading Iran and want Iran weak and helpless to not be able to resist the invasion. That's what's really going on here. Now we're seeing a continued amount of discussion, I guess is a polite word to use for it, over Barack Obama's performance yesterday as he pushed his gun control agenda. And a lot of people are making fun over Obama's tears as one of the Sandy Hook's fathers went out there with this description of, oh, how terrible it was that Adam Lanza, had these guns. Actually, the problem was Adam Lanza was juiced up on prescription psychiatric medication, and there's a documented link between these medications and violence. Nobody wants to talk about that because prescription pharmaceuticals make much more money than gun manufacturers, and that's what sets the priority. We're going to go with the people making the most money and paying the most taxes. And story coming out of Information Liberation saying, we understand that some people have their lives taken using guns, also other things, like that car in Las Vegas, but you don't use that to take away the rights of entirely unrelated parties, unless an armed populace is what the government sees is the problem. And no amount of phony tears is going to change that. In the issue of guns, they're using actions committed by a tiny, tiny minority of gun owners or gun acquirers to try and take away the gun rights of law-abiding American citizens. Now, interestingly enough, Fox News host Andrea Tantaros has suggested that Obama had used a raw onion on the podium to get the tears going for when he wanted to impress us all. Now, Emily Miller, who's a reporter, is starting a trend of calling out Obama on some misstatements he made. Because the gun grabbers are still going out about this, how there are 30,000 gun deaths in America, and that's why we should take guns away. There's a couple of problems with that. First of all, 20,000 of those gun deaths are suicides. And if they don't have guns, they're going to find some other way to kill themselves. Another 1,000 of those gun deaths are police departments murdering innocent Americans. Then you got to take out all the criminals who were shot and killed breaking into a home where there was a law-abiding citizen with a legally owned firearm defending themselves. Most of the murders committed with these kind of weapons involve the drug trade. And where are the drug criminals getting their guns? Fast and furious. More about gun control, gun grab when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about President Obama's quite unconstitutional gun grab yesterday that he's trying to get going, and how a lot of people who didn't fall for the crying stunt are studying what Obama said, and they're finding it full of absolute fabrications, misstatements. And there's one that's reported over on Western Journalism Center about how Twitter lit up after Obama made the claim in his little speech that violent felons can go online and buy weapons with no background check, no questions asked. This is absolutely, totally false. You can't buy a gun online without a background check. You can buy gun parts online. But when it comes to controlling firearms, the BATF has designated a specific component of every type of weapon as legally the gun. That's the part that has to have a serial number and a paper trail and a background check. For the AR-15, that part is the lower receiver. All the other parts you can buy online. That's true. The lower receiver, to buy one of those, you have to go through a background check. Or, and this is perfectly legal, you can make one yourself. And I think that's where Obama is going. He wants to shut down people who are making their own firearms. And again, he's going to shut down the hobbyists, the people who are doing that just because they want to see if they can do it. You've probably heard all of our advertisers here on GCN and seen them at my website for what are called the Ghost 80 rifles, where they will sell you a casting of the lower receiver and you machine it out yourself. And this is perfectly legal under current law for you to do. And you can build a gun. But it's not the same thing as saying a convicted felon can go online and buy a gun without any questions asked. Obama is lying to you to push his agenda. And people who build guns aren't automatically criminals. During my youth, I loved building black powder guns. Make great noisemakers. I just wanted to know I could do it. And I've hunted with some of the weapons I built. But I haven't knocked over a 7-Eleven or started a drug war or any of that other stuff. I like putting holes in paper. It's fun. Now, Judge Napolitano is out there basically saying that, in his opinion, Obama has to know that, in point of fact, the president does not have legal authority to circumvent Congress and simply create laws from his desk. If our Congress had any spine, their duty would be obvious right now. Articles of impeachment. Now, we're already seeing there are lawsuits being prepared to challenge Obama's gun grab on several bases. First of all, it is unconstitutional for him to say that, to just arbitrarily write the laws from his desk. Violations of the Second Amendment. Most of Obama's suggestions are already part of the law, and the others aren't going to work anyway. But we're seeing a very alarming story out of Sputnik News, where Obama can declare a state of emergency of some kind that would block all legal actions on his gun control, EO. The problem with that, and we need to be aware, is Obama needs an event to justify a state of emergency regarding guns. And that may be what they're trying to create up in Oregon. And we'll get into that in a little bit further into the show here. Very alarming story over in Patriot Rising. Dictator doctors. Obama's new executive order gives doctors the power to arbitrarily declare you mentally ill and report you to the FBI, who would then knock on your door and say you've got to surrender your weapons because you've been declared mentally ill. And I'm sure at first reading everybody says, well, we don't want mentally ill people to have guns, except that mentally ill gets used rather recklessly in our society, just like potential terrorist does. Going from that psychiatric diagnostic manual where they take ordinary, normal, natural human behavior and declare it a mental illness, you can see how reckless this is going to be. Ever hear of orthorexia nervosa? This is a mental illness found in people who want to eat natural organic food. They're mentally ill if they've got a problem with GMOs. So if you want natural whole grain food, they can take your guns away. You can see how ridiculous this thing can get. Over the last couple of years, we have had mental health professionals assure us all that anybody doubting the dogma of human-caused global warming, they're mentally ill. Climate skepticism is a mental illness that has to be treated, according to Oregon-based professor of sociology and environmental studies, Carrie Nordgaard. Psychology Today had an article of 3 warning signs that you are in climate change denial. So if you're questioning Al Gore and his carbonazis, Obama's new executive order says they can come take your guns. Now, in a free society, having a different opinion is not a mental illness. And remember, in the old Soviet Union, that's how the government dealt with people who were trying to point out that there were some serious problems in that society. Just declare them mentally ill, put them away in a home, or at the very least, we're not going to listen to them. They have a mental illness. We've seen how this government, once they get the people to go along with an idea that, terrorists are bad, and we can suspend habeas corpus for terror suspects, and we can suspend the Bill of Rights for terror suspects, and it's okay to torture terror suspects, and then all of a sudden they're out there with this huge list of things that make you a potential terrorist, as defined by official U.S. government documents, which includes things like running a conspiracy website makes you a potential terrorist. And I will grant you, I am annoying, obnoxious, and abrasive at times, but I'm not a terrorist. I'm irritating. I'm an irritist. That's it. I'm an irritist. For those who rule us with lies, fraud, and deception. All right, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here. Bob in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Love your show, and I agree with you probably 99% of the time. Here's the deal. Are we under national emergency right now?
Technically, yes. I mean, there are continued national states of emergency that go back to the Roosevelt administration, and every incoming president will revise and extend the existing states of the emergency because all of them grant the president powers not normally allowed to him under the Constitution.
Correct. Therefore, you no longer have a Constitution in effect.
Well, certainly the government feels that way, but I have a different opinion.
Well, the opinion doesn't matter. It's actually what is functioning, and you have a functional martial law. We've had this conversation before. In a sense, I do support you, but we use terms like firearm. Firearm is a misappropriated term. The 1948 Firearms Act was actually about sawed-off shotguns because of bank robbery, correct?
In part, yes, it was. And, we can argue over the meaning of individual words, but I think we got to get back to just
I want to get into reality. It's not about arguing over opinions. It is the truth.
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to respond to that last caller because he's making an argument I have been seeing made many times before in many different contexts, that the government got away with violating the Constitution back in blah, 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 blah. And yes, they did. The federal government exceeding its constitutional authority is not a new phenomenon. That does not obligate the American people to let the federal government continue to flout the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We know that throughout history, people have gotten away with murder. Do we stop trying to find the murderers and put them in prison? Of course not. The fact that the government got away with these abuses earlier is more reflective of the civil population's lack of awareness, the lack of an independent media to say, hey, the government's breaking the rules. Now, I got an email with a little bit of a clarification, and it's worth mentioning. Yes, you can actually order a gun online, but the gun has to be shipped to a gun dealer near where you live, somebody that is in possession of a federal firearms license. You then go down to that gun dealer and go through the background check before the weapon is delivered to you. But that's not what Obama said. He was out there saying, felons can buy guns online, no questions asked. No, Obama lied on that. All right, let's grab ourselves a couple of phone calls here. James in Ohio, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, something that may become relevant with all this talk about you're mentally ill if you don't believe in global warming, etc., is in Butler County, Ohio, they have one of the most corrupt Children Protective Services departments that I've ever heard of. It's kind of like what David Icke reports on in England.
Yes.
They've taken thousands of children under false pretense from their parents, and you can't sue them unless you can prove they didn't deal with you in good faith, which is very difficult.
Well,
anyway,
it's all across the country. I mean, back in the 1990s, I was looking at this stuff. during that heyday of militant feminists, all men are rapists and molesters and everything, and the system was just hideously biased. And the reason these child protective services are trying to grab kids is every kid they justify grabbing means an increase in funding for their operation. And it got really out of control to the point where San Diego literally had to shut down their entire CPS department because they were being sued for constitutional violations by all the men and in some cases the women whose children had been taken. And it really did spin out of control. And I remember at a meeting there was a representative of the Los Angeles County Child Protective Services who literally at the podium said, all men molest children. It's my job to figure out how and when and take the child.
Well,
yeah.
The issue I was going to mention was that the judge that has been behind this for the past 30 years, Joyce Campbell, she set up two courts that they're called mental health courts, and as you can well imagine, there's no better way to take away somebody's constitutional rights than by running them through something called a mental health court. I know people who are not mentally ill, their cases have nothing to do with mental illness, whose cases have been shifted through there, and she briefly had up a page that said that Obama had tapped her to advise in setting up mental health courts all over the country. And after I started posting about it for a couple weeks, it disappeared. But with all this talk about mental illness, which is, of course, an opinion, they've taken people who are normal, taken them to like 8 different psychiatrists and got them diagnosed, and they all came up with a different diagnosis.
Oh, yeah, it is. I mean, there actually is no scientific test you can apply to somebody that says this person is mentally ill. Right. And we know that some of the so-called mental illnesses like ADHD are just frauds to sell medication. The guy who came up with ADHD shortly before he passed away said, it's a fictitious disease. We made it up to get people to buy medicines and give them to their kids. And,
right.
and mental illness is a very subjective thing. What may seem crazy to one person may seem perfectly normal to another. Vikings dying with a sword in their hand so they can get into Valhalla. Personally, I think that's pretty crazy. But to the Vikings, that was normal behavior. They would have looked at me not wanting to die with a sword in my hand and said, boy, that guy's really crazy. Mental health is a matter of fashion. It's not a scientific absolute.
It was also, of course, very popular with the Soviets as a tool in crushing dissent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it looks like Obama's going that same way. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. Have a happy new year. We're going to switch over to Ralph in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just thought you'd like to talk to one of those mentally unstable individuals.
Okay.
That's been classified as mentally unstable.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, well,
they caught you, I'll bet they caught you tap dancing barefoot on shag carpet. I mean, that'll get you written up real fast.
Well, I'm kind of old school.
Yeah.
And some of my actions, I guess, are not fit for society. My wife had an auto accident, and she actually had some neck and brain injury, and the doctor was pushing on her neck forward, and she was screaming and crying. And I'm like, hey, that's hurting her. He goes, she's in no pain. Her blood pressure ain't elevated. And I said, well, I see she's in pain. And he does it again. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, Doc, you do it one more time, you and me are going to have a problem. And he says, who's the doctor? I said, well, you're the doctor, but I'm her husband. Mm-hmm. And he did it again. I said, okay, one more time, we go out in the parking lot. And he says, you threaten me? I said, no, it's no threat. It's going to be a fact. And he called me mentally, or what do you call me, a psychotic.
Ah, okay.
And I said, I don't care what you call me, what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to walk. Now, also, when I got out of the military, I was affected by a concussion from the engine blowing up, okay? Mm-hmm. I was put in the Air Academy Hospital in the Air Force for a week, and they couldn't figure out what the problem was. I mean, let's see, engine blew up, knocked me unconscious. You would think that had something to do with the ringing in my ear, not being able to hear properly, and then after that, every once in a while, I'd get this spinning thing and out of control where I get so dizzy I'd fall down and start throwing up. But, it must be drugs or something, right?
Well, Alan Shepard had the same problem. It took surgery to fix it. That's why, he never flew after his first flight into space until what was it, Apollo 14. They finally let him back into space. There are all these medical issues here. Listen, we're coming up on the top of the hour news break, so we're going to have to wrap it up with you a little bit. But the problem is there is no such thing as an absolute definition of what is mental health or sanity. It's purely subjective. It's a matter of social fashion. What is insane to one society is normal behavior to another. And so it's totally subjective. And as we saw already with people wanting to eat healthy are said to be mentally ill. They're suffering from orthorexia nervosa. People who question human-caused global warming are declared mentally ill by psychology today. You can see how out of control this can get to the point where, Obama's going to say, well, everybody in America is suffering some form of mental illness, so really, just to be safe, we got to take your guns away.
Well, I'm guilty of all that.
I'm sure I'm on the, I look at that list of 74 reasons you can be a potential terrorist, and I think I'm batting about 500 on it.
So, the thing is you talk to the opinions of one of them out here in the public, that's still running around free. But you know what? You want my gun? Come on and take it. I got something for you.
Well, you know something? Psychiatry is the new witch hunt. I mean, in Europe, witch hunters were paid to find witches. Psychiatrists and psychologists are paid to find mentally ill people. And just like the witch hunters saw witches everywhere, the psychiatric profession sees mentally ill people everywhere, and that plays right into this gun grab agenda. No health practitioner wants to see that you're perfectly healthy. They can't make any money off of you. There's going to be something wrong with you.
That's the way it is, and so be it. Like I said, I've drawn my line in the sand, and that's all there is to it. I'm ready to meet my maker.
Well, everybody has to make that decision for themselves. We got to take a break for our top of the hour news and commercials. Thank you for the call, Ralph. Good luck, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're talking about the gun grabbers run amok across the country. And while much of the attention is currently on Barack Obama and his commentary of yesterday, much of which has turned out to be completely inaccurate, out in California, they're pushing toward a gun-free state there, where no Californian is allowed to own a weapon, unless, of course, they work for the drug cartels or something like that, where they're going to have guns anyway. But California Attorney General Gavin Newsom has come out with an anti-gun initiative that is absolutely intended to disarm the people. And instead of the guns, he's going after the ammunition by saying that anybody who wants to buy ammunition for their gun must first get a $50 permit to buy ammunition from the Department of Justice. Gavin wants to ban all online and mail-order ammunition sales. They're going to criminalize private sale and transfer of ammunition. If you buy 5 boxes of ammo and give one to your buddy who's running short, that's going to be a jailable offense. They're going to ban all large-capacity magazines retroactively, ex post facto. Grandfather magazines are not allowed. So, anyway. Meanwhile, over in Manchester, New Hampshire, my old home state, 65-year-old woman shoots a would-be robber in the chest. Lady was just trying to go home, saw she was being followed, tried to park as close to her apartment, got grabbed, had a gun in her purse, shot the guy. Good for her. And it is a reminder that when a crime is committed in the United States of America, or anywhere in the world, when there's a crime, mass shooting, or an act of terror, there are only 2 parties present, the perpetrator and the victim. The police are rarely, if ever, actually there. Average wait time for a 911 call in this country runs between 15 and 22 minutes, depending upon where you live. Now, if you want to stop crime, the only way you can do that is allow the victims the right to have weapons equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminal. And it doesn't mean they have to pull the trigger like this 65-year-old woman had to do. The mere awareness that a neighborhood is armed discourages crime. Why do you think all those mass shooters went to these locations with the big signs out front, gun-free zone? It's an advertisement, giant open-air shooting gallery, nobody will shoot back at you. Come on in and have fun. The government's afraid of you. That's really what's going on behind all of this. Throughout history, every nation descending into tyranny, the government tries to disarm the people so they will do what they're told to do. We're going to have no more of this democracy nonsense. Now, turning over to the war zones, very interesting article over at Bloomberg News, and I called Beck's Alert on this one, where Libya is issuing a cry for help because ISIS is now in Libya destroying their oil assets. And what Bloomberg is trying to convince you all, and remember, earlier in the week, we're reporting on how the U.S. and 3 other nations are getting ready to invade Libya all over again because those gosh darn Libyans won't stay conquered. And Bloomberg is trying to make it look like Libya wants us to come on in and invade their country for the 3rd time and smash it up into rubble even more. Of course the Libyan people want us to do that. They just love America and Americans. So everybody over at Bloomberg, if you think this is such a good idea, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Watch your head climbing into that transport. We'll call Libya and tell them that you are on your way. Now, there is a report. Israel has been shelling South Lebanon based on a claim that a Hezbollah bomb went off, clearly intending to target Israeli forces. Didn't hit any of them. It's just like those rockets coming out of Gaza. Blew a hole in some dirt. That was it. No damage, no casualties, but Israel seized on this one bomb to launch an artillery barrage into South Lebanon. Now, as you know, Vladimir Putin came out the other day and declared that Russia is currently under threat by NATO and especially American expansionism. NATO's come out today with a statement saying, of course not. Just because we're piling up all this military hardware around the Russian border and having war games about invasion, that's no reason to think we're a threat to Russia. That's just incredibly silly. How could you even think a thing like that? Long experience here. All right, let's talk about what's going on up in Oregon, because it's a very, very complicated situation. Over at originalantiwar.com, they have a story. Whatever's going on in Oregon, it's not terrorism. And basically talking about the backstory about the Bureau of Land Management's land grabs all over Oregon, all over the country. Texas, Utah, Nevada, they've been doing it everywhere, grabbing more land so the U.S. government can pledge it as collateral on more of their borrowing. But it's not terrorism. The public lands belong to the public, to the people, not the government. These people in Oregon are standing for constitutional limits on the central government, and they're protecting their public lands from an illegal, unconstitutional incursion. The protesters in Oregon are not the ones who are acting outside the law. It is the federal government that does. And it looks like things may be escalating. Remember, earlier in the show, I said, I quoted this article where Obama could declare a national emergency to block legal challenges to yesterday's executive order on guns. And in order to be able to declare a national emergency, there has to be an event. So now we're looking at this very alarming story out of PatriotRising.com, quoting the Oath Keepers organization, that their sources are telling them that there is a government group, this National Guard Special Operations Detachment, on its way to Oregon, pretending to be a militia, to act as agent provocateurs, to pull the trigger and make it look like the protesters fired the first shot. so that the FBI and the military can go on in there and make a bloody example of all of them for the rest of America to say, see, we can't stand up to the government. Look what will happen to us. Oh, gosh darn those patriots. They fired the first shot. And then, of course, Obama's got all of his justification to render patriot groups illegal, grab all the guns. But Oath Keepers tends to be pretty much on the ball here. And we know this government relies on false flags to get you to think that black is white, up is down, left is right. Remember what it came out after the Kent State massacre. An FBI undercover informant fired a starter pistol to trick the National Guard into thinking the anti-war protesters were shooting at them. The National Guard returned fire and a bunch of students got killed. Now, there's a very good video on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. It's by a lady named Chrisanne Hall. What's really going on in Oregon, it is worth looking at. It's a very clear laying out of how it is the government that is acting illegally and unconstitutionally against people who are taking a stand for their rights as citizens of the United States of America. And it's worth looking at. And we need to keep getting that message out because the corporate media is still out there saying, oh, they're terrorists, they're criminals, they're all kinds of smears and lies about what's going on. The facts of the matter speak for themselves. We'll be right back. We got a phone call waiting. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call here from Michael down in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello?
Hello. You're on the air.
Hello?
You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Oh, okay. Sorry to cut out for a second there. Hey, Mike, sorry to switch gears. I know you were talking about Oregon, and I know it's an important subject and all. But I just wanted to point out, I was listening to another radio program, and the person I was on was Paul Craig Roberts, and he was describing something that the Pentagon actually ran 16 different war games with the U.S. going against Russia as far as Navy, Air Force, ground, and out of all 16 tests or war games, that the United States would have lost every single one of them.
Yes.
So I don't know if you ever saw that, but I just think it kind of just brings to the surface the point, like, no matter how much money we throw at the United States military, I think it's just all just a big, huge boondoggle. Because ever since, I think, World War II, the United States has always been quantity over quality. Because another thing he was pointing out is the German Tiger tank, he was saying, was the best tank that there was in all World War II. But the only reason, I think, because Hitler was losing the war is because one Tiger tank, the United States built six of their tanks in order to pick up that one Tiger tank.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. Of course, something that is not taught in our public school system is that Germany was already losing the war when the U.S. finally came into World War II after Pearl Harbor. And it was Russia, and in particular the Russian winter, that turned the tide against Nazi Germany, just as it had done against Napoleon.
Yeah, and those 20 million Russians that died, that have lost their lives, those are the unsung heroes as far as World War II is concerned. Yeah, we get the whole, 6 million, this, blah, 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 but it was those 20 million Russians that were fighting against the Germans in order to allow the Americans to come in and finish off the war. So,
well, it's growing up as a young kid in New England and stuff, I literally grew up thinking the United States had won World War II. And we were the major player. And certainly we were at the end in terms of Japan. Germany, you're absolutely right. They spent a lot of money on their weapons, and they weren't cost effective. The U.S. is making exactly the same mistake. We're making hideously expensive weapons that are not very effective. Russia has a long history of trying to make their weapons very cost effective so they can build more of them. They're all rough field capable in terms of the aircraft, whereas American warplanes, before you even try a takeoff, you got to walk down the runway and pick up all the paper clips and stuff so that they don't get sucked into the engine and cause a turbine crash.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's what's I think a lot of these armchair warriors, as far as like they're talking about, oh, the United States is the best, and all the Russians, oh, they're just drunk on vodka and blah blah blah. But the thing is the Russians, they just build shit. Or stuff that works.
Don't you curse on this here radio?
No, I'm sorry about that. No, but they just build stuff that works. Okay, so right now I put up an S-400 in my backyard. There's not a single U.S. airplane that's going to fly by. And not that I'm some kind of Russian, whatever. Not that I'm some kind of communist sympathizer or whatever you want to call it, but that's the fact of the matter. Like, that's why you get so much, like, I think that's why the United States, they turned into this third or fourth dimensional type of warfare of going into countries and subverting the government, because they know their military, the actual hardware, they can't.
Well, it's cheaper to do. It's cheaper to do, and it was effective in an age where people of the world didn't understand that's what was happening. But today, it's very different. All the people of these countries, whether it's Libya, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Iran, they all know what has been the real author of their history of turmoil and revolution in their country. And now the American people understand that the U.S. government has been playing this game over 50 times since the end of World War II, of going on in and changing the government of foreign countries to put in a government favorable to U.S. business interests.
Yeah, and I think that's entirely why the United States is going in and trying to conquer all the smaller countries. So there's the other war games that were going on, I think, in early 2001 when they were trying to compare the Iranian Navy to the United States, and how all the Iranian fast boats, they took out like 90% of all the American or the U.S. Navy and all that stuff because of all their fast boats. So I think that's why they're doing the soft approach of trying to conquer all the smaller nations. Oh, we're going to go conquer Libya because we can. And then that's why...
I don't know. They're not having much luck over there. I mean, they're having to go back in yet again. They've had to go into Iraq 3 times. They've had to go into Libya twice already. Looks like they're going to have a third one on that. Had to go into Yemen twice. Now it looks like they're going to have a third one on that as well. They can't maintain the control over the countries they've conquered because the people of these countries understand their new governments are not working for the nation and the people, but for a foreign power. Just like Americans are waking up and realizing how much our federal government is working on behalf of Israel. And we don't like that. We don't like those kind of games.
Yeah, and that's why they're trying to go for quantity over quality, or not really quantity, or quality, because Iran and Russia, I think they're inconquerable at this point. The only way that Iran's going to be conquered is with nuclear weapons, and with that, obviously Russia and China are going to come in. The only way to conquer Russia is nuclear weapons, and I think they're at a quagmire because that's their only way out at this point. Because now they're just
I agree with your assessment. The U.S. Because of very costly, ineffective weapons, which were designed and sold to make money for the defense contractors, not to be an effective military force, the U.S. really cannot prevail in conventional war against Russia and China, especially if Russia and China are allied together at the same time. And that makes the use of nuclear weapons by the United States inevitable. The only other option is the economy implodes before they can get the war going. Wall Street comes crashing down, so does Washington, D.C. We all hunker down for a few months to get through the chaos, and then we set up a whole new country. The way this happened when the USSR collapsed. And life is a lot better in Russia today for the Russian people.
Yeah, and then I'll leave you with this because obviously you have a show to continue on, is just as far as quantity and quality, is look at what Russia's been able to accomplish with, 30 warplanes in Syria with the United States and their, 1,200, 1,500 warplanes couldn't accomplish.
Let's be honest. Let's be honest here. Russia really was after ISIS. The U.S. wasn't. The U.S. was just pretending. Okay, Michael.
I'm sorry.
Commercial break. Commercial break. We got to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And interesting little story about the Hammond case. This is coming from the Bundy Ranch's own website, pointing out that all of this legal action against the Hammonds have been carried out by the court to impose huge fines on the Hammonds. Now, the Hammonds have already paid $200,000 in fines to the Bureau of Land Management. And if the Hammonds cannot pay the remainder of the fines, and I understand the deadline is already passed, the courts will force the Hammonds to sell their ranch to the Bureau of Land Management. And if they refuse, they will face further prosecution. It's just a land grab. First, they came for the ranchers, and I did not speak out because I was not a rancher. Apologies to Martin Niemöller. Now, Megyn Kelly was interviewing Bundy, trying to basically portray the Bundys and all of these other ranchers as clearly in the wrong because the government knows what's best for all of us. And Bundy asked Megyn Kelly point blank, do you know who the plaintiff in this action is? And Kelly paused and said, keep going. And Bundy said, no, I'm asking you, who was the plaintiff against the Hammonds? And Kelly says, well, I'm waiting for you to make your point. I don't answer questions on my show. I ask them. Which tells us all that Megyn Kelly was utterly clueless about the facts in the case. She's just there to read the prepared talking points, get her huge paycheck, and go home. Now then, latest word from the government is that officials are planning on cutting off the water and power to this building and wait for the sub-zero temperatures to convince everybody to go home, which is silly. I mean, that's a failed plan. NOAA says we just ended the hottest year on record ever. There can't be sub-zero cold. That would mean Al Gore was lying to us. Anyway, it's been a year since the false flag attacks on Charlie Hebdo, which has resulted in a very strange redefinition of freedom of speech in France, where you can criticize Christianity and Islam all you want, but by golly, don't you say anything bad about Israel. Interestingly enough, a group of U.S. citizens is now suing the U.S. Treasury for allowing donations to the illegal Israeli settlements to qualify for tax deductions here in the United States of America. Now, the settlements are illegal under international law. Money sent to them shouldn't be considered a legitimate tax-deductible charity under U.S. law. So we'll see what happens with that one. But it's another reminder. We have a Vichy government in Washington, D.C. They're more concerned about what's going on with Israel than with the American people. I mean, look at that blowback from the revelation that the NSA had captured conversations between U.S. Congressman and Benjamin Netanyahu, and how upset everybody was that, oh, the NSA is still spying on Netanyahu. And we never saw that outrage when it was the NSA spying on law-abiding American citizens in violation of the Fourth Amendment. It's open season on the American people, but by golly, if you go up against Israel, we're going to slash your budget or something. All right, let's talk about the economy. As you know, the slide in the stock market continued today. There was very obviously an effort in the last hour to try and drive the Dow back up above 17,000. They failed. People got to be getting very, very nervous about what's going on. The plunge protection team can't get the market back up there again. All the indicators are we're heading into a shutdown of the economy. Baltic Dry Index, Shipping Index, Rail Index. It was a horrible retail Christmas shopping season because Americans don't have money to buy stuff. Still trying to blame this all on China. Oh, it's China's fault. China did this, China did that. Well, China is a manufacturing, exporting nation. And one of their biggest customers has been the United States. With all this Chinese-made goods coming into our stores, that's how it was working. But as the U.S. economy has shifted from capitalism into fascism and all the wealth is concentrated at the very top, ordinary Americans can't buy those Chinese products anymore. And China's manufacturing and export numbers have suffered. And it's led to a chain reaction across China's economy and around the world. But it's not China's fault. corporate media wants you to think it is. Now, there's a very interesting article that was over at Blacklisted News. High-level Federal Reserve official is blowing the whistle that the Federal Reserve intentionally front-loaded an enormous stock market rally in order to create a wealth effect. In other words, the Federal Reserve got caught doing a pump and dump, which for anybody but the Federal Reserve would be a prison sentence. And apparently it wasn't just the Federal Reserve, it was the Bank of Japan, Bank of Israel, Bank of Switzerland, the Czech Republic are buying up the stocks to drive up the market. So we shouldn't blame all of this chaos on China. Because sooner or later, I mean, all this profit taking, that money doesn't come out of thin air. The only money coming out of thin air is at the private central banks. In the equities markets, that money has to come from somewhere, somehow, at some point. The market is drastically overvalued because of all this manipulation. And when it unwinds, it is going to be ugly. Now, over at Zero Hedge, they have an article where Gartman is out there saying we're now in a full-fledged bear market. The stock market is going to be going down. The bulls have gone to sleep, whether you call it January effect or whatever. What's even more alarming, technical analysts from UBS are saying it is time to dump your stocks and buy gold. They're predicting a 30% decline in the stock markets. This is coming from UBS. Over in Saudi Arabia, their economy's in trouble. They're having to sell bonds for the first time because of the oil price wars. And as is the case with any government, the first thing they're going to do is start looting their own people. Saudi Arabia's ruling family has kept to power because they spend a great deal of their oil wealth on the people. They do have a high standard of living there. And now they're having to start slashing those services for their own citizens. And the cash crunch is so dire, the Saudi government has just hiked the price of gasoline domestically by 50%. They still get their gas a lot cheaper than we do, but for the Saudi people, that's a major blow. And it's probably going to increase discontent with the Saudi royal family. Puerto Rico just defaulted on $37 million in debt, and I know in this age of $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, $37 million doesn't seem like much, but I'm wondering what the derivatives exposure is on the Puerto Rican debt and where it leads because of the uncontrolled nature of credit default swaps. There could be $1,000 of credit default swaps sold on every single dollar of Puerto Rico's debt. That's the way it's set up. We could see a cascade effect coming out of Puerto Rico hitting the American markets. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break. When we come on back, we're going to be talking more about the economy. And there's some very troubling signs out there. I don't think they're going to make it all the way to Election Day this year without the economy coming apart. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economy right now. And there's a very enlightening article over at naturalnews.com. Nations of the world are drowning in debt, and a massive global avalanche of debt default is now imminent. Puerto Rico has defaulted. Kiev has defaulted on its gas bill to Russia. There's going to be a chain reaction. The dominoes are going to start to fall. And the reason for this goes all the way back to something I've been saying for years now. When you have a privately owned central bank issuing the nation's currency as a loan at interest, by design, the debt exceeds the available money supply. And it's never reversed. And the debt grows and grows and grows. And there's no way to deal with it unless you want to go back to King Philip IV, who got out of his banker enslavement by grabbing the bankers and torturing them and setting fire to them, which is starting to look attractive, let's be honest. But that's the curse of private central banking. Sooner or later, the system has to collapse from its accumulated debt. And during that collapse, the bankers will come on in and say, well, if you can't pay your debt, we get your national parks, and we get the highways, and we get the waterworks, and we get all of this hard assets, and it now belongs to us. I have an argument with that, which we'll get into in a little bit. But that's the problem, private central banking. By design, it traps nations and people in hopelessly unpayable debt, and the debt grows and grows and grows until it can't be sustained. And this is the author of these gigantic wars, such as we now face. Because when a corrupted government sells you into the slavery of a private central bank issuing all the public currency as a loan at interest, everybody is having to borrow currency to conduct business. They go into debt until they reach a point where they don't want to borrow anymore because they're spending all their energy maintaining and servicing that debt. But there has to be more debt to create more money, and that's where the Keynesian economists come on in and say government has to start borrowing on behalf of the people, and I might add, without their permission, to keep that little pyramid going a little bit longer until you reach a point where the people won't borrow anymore, and the government can't borrow anymore, which is where we are in the United States right now, and that's when they launch a war to try and balance their books with the wealth of other nations. It's a very sick three-step process. One follows the other without exception. Before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war. Now we're on the doorstep of big mistake number 3. And it all goes back to that private central banking system by which we are all held as slaves to debt. Now, getting on back to that issue about during the collapse, what happens is the real hard assets of a nation wind up in the pockets of the bankers. We're seeing an article from TrueRepublica.org UK. Britain is undergoing the fastest asset stripping in their history as their economic policies fail to deliver. Well, of course they're going to fail to deliver. You can never pay off that debt because the debt grows faster than the available money supply. It's designed that way. And so as Britain gets into more and more trouble, it's a call about privatization. We're going to privatize all of these assets. Now, I don't know about the laws in Great Britain, but here in the United States of America, these assets they're talking about, our national parks, our highways, and so forth, are the property of the people because our taxes paid for them. They're our birthright. The government's job is to maintain the assets of the American people. And the reason that enclave clause was put in that Constitution by the Founding Fathers was so the government couldn't stand up and say, well, actually, we own the highways, so we can sell them to private toll road companies, and we own the water infrastructure, so we can sell it to Nestle, or we own this, and we can sell it to whatever. Because the Founding Fathers knew that failed governments strip the wealth of the nation to preserve their own wealth and power just a little bit longer. And we're seeing signs of serious problems here in the United States of America. Apparently over in New Jersey, they're starting to have reliability problems with their rail system because Chris Christie has been diverting the funds for capital improvements and maintenance on the rail system just to cover the daily operating costs. Because with massive unemployment in New Jersey, and remember, New Jersey is one of the top 5 states in fiscal trouble in the United States right now, along with here in Hawaii, people don't ride the rails as much as they used to. They don't have anything to ride to. They don't have jobs. And so the system is starting to fall apart. Okay, now let's get on to the campaign and the candidates here. As you know, at the end of the year, New Year's Eve, when we weren't supposed to be looking, there was another release of 3,000 Hillary Clinton emails from the State Department. Corporate media is going gaga over the gossipy text messages, who gets to ride with Hillary and all this other stuff. But more serious people looking into these documents are finding confirmation of a lot of what we have been saying about Libya. Admissions of rebel war crimes, special ops trainers inside Libya, right from the start of the protests, Al-Qaeda embedded in the U.S.-backed opposition, And, of course, Western corporations trying to grab access to Libya's oil. And, of course, concern over Gaddafi's move to a value-based currency, the gold dinar. It's all in these Hillary Clinton emails. That's what was going on. When Gaddafi set up the gold dinar and then said he was going to sell Libya's oil only for the gold dinar, that was it. That's when he went to the top of the special high-interest targets list. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Tom in Baltimore. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'll make it real quick. It caught my attention when you mentioned the debt. And I've always wondered how so many educated people fail to talk about, and I assume that they simply don't realize that, like you said, the debt simply cannot be paid off, not because solely that it's growing faster than we can get the funds in, but that we pay for the money. The money is actually a debt instrument.
That's exactly right. That federal
Carson was talking about this, and she failed to mention that. These are very smart people, but obviously, apparently, they have not even looked into the very basics of our money system, and that concerns me.
Well, I think it was Henry Ford who commented that it was very good that the American people didn't really understand how the banking system actually worked, or there'd be a revolution the next morning. And he was absolutely right. We've all been brainwashed to think that this is the way banking is supposed to be, this is the way the economy is supposed to be, this is the way life is supposed to be. And, of course, that kind of instillment of belief underlies every abusive system of rulership in history, whether it's ruled by compound interest, ruled by divine right, ruled by slavery. You have to convince the people this is the way the world is supposed to be, and anybody who thinks otherwise is mentally ill or speaking against the gods or just a troublemaker and a commie.
Let's all in unison hold our nose and take that bitter pill and wake up to the reality, because, and I'll leave you with this, those lands that are taken by the government, very tangible assets, and I guarantee you the government is making money off of those assets.
Of course they are. Of course they are. I mean, there's already talk that the uranium under the Hammond Ranch has already been promised to a foreign country. We know that down in Nevada, Reed has been caught up in the financial shenanigans where some of this land the BLM grabbed for wildlife preservation is actually being privatized and sold off to Chinese interests. They're just looting the nation.
The Republic is not a spectator sport. It never has been, never will be.
I'm sorry, what is not a spectator sport?
A free republic has never been a spectator sport. It can't be. You have to be involved.
Yeah, you have to be. Voting is not enough. In fact, I tried to start an organization called Vine that was voting is not enough. It's up to the American people to keep the government where the American people need that government to be. All right, we got to take a break for top of the hour news and commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Tom, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Now, getting on back to the campaign trail, and, of course, we're 4 weeks away now from the first of the elections going into this election season. So everybody's getting nervous, and they're out there campaigning, and they're up in Iowa. And Hillary Clinton, as she campaigned in Sioux City, Iowa, yesterday, applauded Obama's executive orders on gun control, said she was very proud of what the president did with the executive order. Now, setting aside the issue of the Second Amendment, this tells us that Hillary Clinton has absolutely no problem with the idea of a president writing the laws of the land from the desk of the Oval Office. And that is something that I think we cannot allow anymore, because that's not the way the country is supposed to be run. Clinton is also out there defending the big banks. Remember when she was getting all this money from Wall Street and said, no, really, I'm going to be taking care of the little people. But she's out there responding to Bernie Sanders' comments about breaking up the big banks and saying, oh, no, the big banks are fine. They're great. We love the big banks here. And she is endorsing the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which is, of course, what set the stage for the crash of 2008. So, I see your true colors shining through. According to a former U.S. attorney, Joe DiGenova, who worked under President Reagan, He is saying Clinton could face an FBI criminal indictment within the next 60 days. I would love to see it. I would be delighted if it was going to happen. Hillary Clinton could be indicted. She should be indicted. I don't think it's going to happen. Because the FBI has been the Clintons' protectors going all the way back to the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, which was the event which triggered my involuntary career change from film to truth activist. We all know the Clintons should have been charged on a whole variety of crimes. But there's a class of people in the United States government called the untouchables, the ones who know where all the bodies are buried and how they got to be bodies. They've got the blackmail goods on everybody, and they cannot be touched. I would love to see the FBI actually do its job and bring an indictment against Hillary Clinton. I'd like her to be charged and convicted, because if you are convicted of a felony, you are disqualified from being president. Although it seems like nobody seems to really be all that worried about whether somebody is qualified to run for president or not, except Donald Trump. Donald Trump has waded in on the issue of Ted Cruz's citizenship, because everybody understands Ted Cruz was born in Canada. He's not a natural-born citizen. He just isn't. Now, Trump is out there saying that this candidacy issue could tie up the courts for 2 years. No, not really. It's pretty much absolute. And I did repost my article on what natural-born citizen means, based on the legal writings of the day and 4 United States Supreme Court decisions. Natural-born means born in this country. It doesn't just mean any U.S. citizen, or they wouldn't have used that word, that phrase, natural born, in front of the requirements for president. It's not there for members of Congress. Members of Congress have to be U.S. citizens, but they don't have to be natural born. That's reserved for the president for a reason. So you might all want to take a look at that article on what natural born really means and forward it to all of your friends. Now, there's a very interesting story. Came out of Investment Watch blog. It's on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. And it's reporting on a phenomenon that is starting to really manifest itself. As you know, Donald Trump is drawing these huge crowds. Everywhere he goes, he rents a sports arena and he fills it. And there are political analysts who are talking to the people in the audience who are there for Donald Trump, and they're starting to notice a very interesting trend. Not only are independents showing up for Donald Trump's rallies, so are a lot of Democrats. There are Democrats who are looking at the lineup of candidates being offered to them by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, which is basically one, Hillary Clinton. The DNC and Schultz have made it clear. Hillary Clinton's going to be the candidate, and there are a lot of Democrats who are not happy with that. They're starting to go to Donald Trump's rallies. Donald Trump came out with a statement earlier today that he is confident that if this election comes down to Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump is going to win. And barring massive election fraud or Trump being killed, both of which are quite possible, yeah, I'll take Trump over Hillary Clinton any day. Now, out in Nevada, there's been kind of an interesting story. Sheldon Adelson has spent $7 million of his fortune funding a pro-Israel propaganda operation run by the son of his former top aide at the Las Vegas Sands Corporation. Now, these are the people who go on out and they post pro-Israel propaganda all over the websites. They call into radio shows and scream you're an anti-Semite Jew hater who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. Sheldon Adelson was funding them. All of a sudden, for some reason, he's cut off funding. Let's just let him drop. We don't know why, but I think it's significant this early in the election cycle. Now, over at Washington's blog, they've got a wonderful article. I'm going to summarize it here, but I encourage you to go and read it for yourself. It's How Corrupt is the American Government? And it is just this gigantic laundry list of all the stories we have been covering over the last several years about how senior SEC employees were spending 8 hours a day surfing porn on their taxpayer-funded computers instead of going after people like Bernie Madoff. Same thing over at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We're watching porn when they should have been checking reactors for safety violations, like the one that shut down San Onofre. Over at the Environmental Protection Agency, they had an employee who downloaded 7,000 pornographic files and spent between 2 and 6 hours each day watching it. Did it for years. EPA never fired him. NSA passing around homemade sex videos and pictures they've collected from you, spying on your computers, spying on their love interests, sharing phone sex recordings. Employee of the TSA admitted the TSA keeps the nude scans of really hot-looking people. Treasury's Office of the Inspector General, some of the regulator's employees were surfing erotic websites, hiring prostitutes, and accepted gifts from bank executives. Minerals Management Service, DEA, it goes on and on and on and on. Now remember what I said before. The moral and the immoral are mutually exclusive societies. Neither one tolerates the presence of the other. When a government starts to go bad, it goes all the way bad. And that's where we are right now. The good people get kicked out, whether it's a Cynthia McKinney or a Ron Paul. They don't want anybody in there spoiling the party because they think life is great. They've got all the wealth and all the power. They can get all the guns. They can sleep soundly at night with their accumulated wealth. And they think that's the way the world is supposed to be. They're absolutely convinced that whatever imaginary playmate in the sky they pray to wants them to have all the wealth and power and for everybody else to just go without. They see that's the way the world is supposed to be. We got to take another break here for commercials. When we come on back, we're going to talk about immigration. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to talk about immigration a little bit. Over in Germany, as you know, during the New Year's, there was a tremendous upset over some of the refugees getting a little out of control, especially in the city of Cologne. And a lot of women were assaulted. And the German government's response has been to issue a series of recommendations on how German women should dress so they don't provoke sexual thoughts in the refugees. This is like all the way back in the 1980s when they had the blame the victim mentality. Oh, women were being raped because they dressed like sluts. It's all their fault. Angela Merkel has come out telling the German people they have to accept that there are going to be some problems with these young migrants, and it's going to be high. You just have to get used to it. I think the German people have other ideas. Now, down in Texas, there's a city councilman, and his name is Marco Rodriguez, and he's former U.S. Army veteran. And he got arrested because he has apparently been smuggling undocumented immigrants across the border. This is a city councilman, and he's on board with this bringing in of illegal immigrants. Now, as we mentioned last week, there was this gigantic fire in Dubai at the Address Downtown Dubai Luxury Hotel. Somebody did a time-lapse of it. Got into a good position just when the fire was started this video. It's very dramatic to look at, seeing how the fire just races up the entire one side of the building. And it's interesting to look at, and of course, the building is still standing. Far more fire than hit Building 7. It's still standing. And remember, Building 7, because it housed U.S. government offices, was built much stronger and more fire and explosion proof than the normal New York City building code requires. And a lot of people are looking at all of this and saying, yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. that Building 7, with a couple of fires in a couple of offices, just collapsed into its own footprint. The TSA is once again outraging the American people. As you know, they have changed the rules. You are no longer allowed to opt out of those skin cancer-causing machines. And they've gone overboard again. Apparently, when this 10-year-old girl was going through the scanner, and the scanner got a hit, which turned out to be one of those little foil juice pouches that kids like to sip from. And because the TSA scanner found a juice pouch, the TSA agents gave this 10-year-old girl a 2-minute aggressive pat-down at the airport. She's traumatized. She said, felt like screaming. The father is outraged over a juice pouch. Enough. All right, let's talk about some of the environmental disasters that have been happening. Member posted a story to WhatReallyHappened.com. Apparently, this many years after the disaster at Fukushima, there is an explosion of mutated life forms all around that region of Japan. The genetic damage is taking a while to surface, but it is definitely surfacing. A lot of people are very concerned now about this massive methane leak near Los Angeles, up above Simi Valley. And the media is ignoring it because the government can't do a thing about it, and because it's invisible. Unless you're smelling it, and a lot of people are, you don't see it unless you're looking at infrared, and then it's obvious. The huge volume of methane being blasted into the atmosphere. It's a major catastrophe. Now, they've already evacuated something like 1,500 families, but even people living outside the evacuation zone are starting to suffer random nosebleeds, vomiting. Doctors are saying, if you can get out, if you can move, get out. Now, one of the hidden dangers of methane, and yes, they've added the chemical to this that makes it stink so that you know that it's there. Methane by itself has no odor. That's why coal miners used to have a canary in a cage, because the canary's higher metabolism, the canary would pass out from the methane before the humans did. And that's what the canary in the coal mine was all about, detecting methane gas exposure. But along with that is the idea that that volume of methane in the atmosphere really is a cause of global warming. The reason it looks dark on infrared is it's absorbing the sun's infrared radiation. Methane is something like 70 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. But carbon dioxide was picked as the villain by the global warming people because you can't tax people for methane the way you can for carbon dioxide. Water vapor is the most potent greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. Try and get people to pay a cloud tax. But getting on back to this methane release in Southern California. Methane takes oxygen out of the air or out of the water. Because methane, when it combines with oxygen, produces water vapor and carbon dioxide. That's the cause of all of these strange fish die-offs in lakes and streams around the fracking sites. And the corporate media will come back and say, well, the oxygen was depleted from the water, which is accurate, but they're not explaining why. And that's why. That's the mechanism. As the methane bubbles up through the water, it's taking the oxygen out. And without the oxygen, the fish are going to die. So downwind from this methane blowout, you're going to see a decreasing amount of atmospheric oxygen. And they're going to pretend it's not a problem because they can't do anything about it. Just like Fukushima. It'll be okay. A little radiation's good. A little methane. Yeah, we're going to get Ann Coulter out there to say a little methane is good for you. Amazing. Apparently up in Canada, in Manitoba, there was a mother who followed the recommendations of taking her toddler due to the state medical system's nursing stations. Had been there 40 times. And apparently they missed the fact that this daughter, Violet, who was only 2, was developing cancer. they finally detected the cancer just days before she died from it. Now, a lot of people talk about Canada's medical system, but it does have issues. And I think anytime you have a government running something like that, inevitably there are problems, because people in government don't know what it is they're trying to manage. We'll be right back. What's going on is we just had a power blackout, and we're trying to get our systems back up online here. But I think we're good to go here. So we're talking about this report about how vaccines can actually trigger autoimmune disorders in patients who receive them. But they make money, so I guess that's kind of all that really matters here. Another story coming out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. There's been another study, actually 23 studies, which on analysis seem to indicate that women who take antidepressants during the first 12 weeks of their pregnancy show a noticeable increase in the risk of birth defects. Apparently, the drug under examination was paroxetine, and apparently it triggered a 23% increase in the risk of major congenital malformations. So here we are. Let's talk about human-caused global warming. And remember, if you doubt global warming, you are mentally ill and your guns will be taken away from you. So we're looking at a story over at dailycaller.com, and it's in response to NOAA's continuing insistence. 2015 was the hottest year on record. There's been no pause in warming at all, and they're still stonewalling the Congress for much of the data they claim to base this on, which resulted in a Judicial Watch lawsuit to try and knock that information loose. Now, NOAA continues to insist they don't have to show the raw data and the methodology. We're just supposed to take their word for it. And they actually claimed that they were doing this to preserve the integrity of the scientific process, which for anybody who understands scientific method is a load of nonsense, because the heart of scientific method is reproducibility. If you have a set of data or an experiment and a method and you get a result, I should be able to take the same data, conduct the same experiment, use the same method, and come up with exactly the same result. If you don't, if the results are not reproducible, it's not considered science. So apparently, climate scientists with the University of Alabama in Huntsville have reported that according to the unmanipulated satellite data, 2015 wasn't even close to being the hottest year on record. They're saying there was a little warming over last year, primarily caused by El Nino, which we know is triggered by massive undersea eruptions on the floor of the ocean near New Zealand. Yeah, volcanoes add heat to the world. Apparently over in Minnesota, the playoff game for the Vikings is already being fretted over because they may be dealing with record cold temperatures during the game. It's also getting cold over in Kiev, and apparently the people of Kiev are filing all kinds of complaints that their homes are getting too cold. For a lot of them, the heating is even turned off because Kiev cannot pay for any more gas. The Crimeans had to come in and send gas to a town in South Ukraine to keep them from freezing. It's going to be a brutal winter. It's a little late in getting here because of El Nino. It's going to be a brutal winter. And Obama's going to still be pushing for his carbon tax. Walmart has recalled 90,000 pounds of beef for containing what is described as extraneous wood materials. And that's kind of an interesting little area because a lot of the products that are marketed as beef are allowed to have, literally, wood pulp as a filler. Remember, 100% pure beef does not mean 100% pure piece of a cow anymore. The FDA and the USDA have allowed these names to be changed from representing a description of what you're buying to being a trademarked brand. For example, if you go into a supermarket and you buy a can of tuna, there can be any one of 17 different species of fish in that can that may not be tuna, but they're allowed to sell it under that name. But apparently there was a little bit too much here in this Walmart meat, and they've had to recall it here. Interesting little story from the New York Daily News. Out in California, a customer at Starbucks caught the cashier stealing her credit card information and challenged the cashier, and it was caught on video. A lot of very colorful language. The video's gone viral, which I'm sure is going to be causing all kinds of problems for Starbucks. But there's another issue there. Why are you buying a cup of coffee with a piece of plastic? Anytime you use that piece of plastic, you are vulnerable to somebody stealing from you. Apparently they're finding credit card sniffers on gas pumps. I think it was in Ohio. And it's very alarming to hear the government talking about banning all cash and requiring you to use plastic cards, because that makes you more vulnerable to the cyber criminals. Kind of makes you wonder what side they're on. I mean, I think it was 3 Christmases ago, my wife got caught by one of these people walking around the shopping mall with a backpack with a laptop and some radio gear, and got the information off of her chipped credit card. And after we sorted out that mess, we told the credit card company we don't want any more credit cards with chips. We prefer not. That same credit card company has just sent us a new credit card with a chip and said, you will use this. We've canceled your last one. You will use this radio-enabled chip. This radio-enabled card, rather. Yes, I know we can get a radio-blocking wallet or purse, or we can just put the credit card in the bureau or the desk and never use it. That's a good idea. But why are you using a credit card or a debit card to buy a cup of coffee? That doesn't make what the Starbucks cashier did right, of course. But we know people in these hard economic times are resorting to crime to get by. Let's not make it easier for them. All right, let's grab a phone call here. Francis in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. There's several articles here that have come up. Like, as you know, there's at least 3 cities in Germany where they had these rape riots, and they shut down rail stations and were attacking women and robbing people. Also, in today's Rent, the headline is, in September 2015, the Greek Coast Guard began searching 14 shipping containers full of furniture. They found almost immediately 5,000 combat 12-gauge shotguns and over 500,000 rounds of ammunition. And then it goes on to say that, like, the smuggling of weapons for this, covert army coming into Europe and then, I guess, North America. And this is like a potentially explosive situation. And then on top of that, Russia Today and many other journals are reporting that Switzerland, their leadership is saying that they have to arm in preparation for a European meltdown. And it's like there's this confluence of events where this isn't simply a migration. This is a real invasion of an enemy army, and it's going to explode into a civil war, at the very least in Europe.
It certainly does seem to have indications going that way, and it's rather interesting that the government of Switzerland is telling their people, arm up, while our president is saying, surrender your guns. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Francis. We're going to let you go, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program here on our Wednesday program. Interesting little story coming out of naturalblaze.com. Apparently, over in North Dakota, to meet rising public demand for GMO-free food, this grain terminal is going to go GMO-free. They're going to clean out all the grain, make sure it's all gone, no pollen, and they're going to basically reopen carrying agricultural commodities that are GMO-free. This, of course, is going to get Monsanto down on their case. Now, remember, a while back over in France, there was a research study done by these French scientists who took some rats, and they had 4 groups. all natural food, GMO corn, natural food but glyphosate pesticide, and the fourth group was GMO corn and the glyphosate pesticide together. And starting at 4 months, 1 month after Monsanto's own tests had been ended to declare the product safe, the rats started suffering huge medical problems, massive tumors, reproductive failure, shortened lifespan. And Monsanto exerted its mighty power to get the article, well, discredited. It was never retracted. They simply smeared it. And the journal where it had been published retracted it after they hired a former Monsanto executive onto the editorial staff. Now, a lot of what was said about this study was outright nonsense, and the lead scientist, Seralini, started a libel lawsuit. And apparently the High Court of Paris indicted Professor Marc Fellous, who was the former chairman of the French Biomolecular Engineering Commission, for forgery to misrepresent what had happened in that study. And so the scientist has won his libel trial. They'll be setting a penalty in the coming weeks. And it is a reminder that science gets bought and sold by corporations and governments here. Vladimir Putin is reasserting his agenda to have Russia become the #1 exporter of non-GMO foods. And the world is going to be beating a path to their doorstep. Because it doesn't matter if you've got TPP and TTIP saying that nobody's allowed to identify GMO food. People are going to go buy Russian agricultural exports over U.S. agricultural exports just to be safe. And they are smart to do that. Now, apparently over in Jackson County, Oregon, they're not all statists over there, but a federal judge in Jackson County, Oregon, upheld a consent decree that designated a part of Oregon as a genetically engineered free zone, based on the fact that Oregon has a law called the Right to Farm Act, meaning anybody can grow whatever they want anywhere in the state without interference. And these farmers got together and wanted to declare their particular region GMO-free. Monsanto was fighting it tooth and nail. And the judge said, yeah, under Oregon law, if they want to have a GMO-free farm, they are allowed to have a GMO-free farm. Now, here's a story out of Blacklisted News. GW Pharmaceuticals has applied for and will probably get a green light from the FDA for a new pharmaceutical product based on cannabis and labeled for multiple health conditions. See, they don't want you growing marijuana in your own backyard and using it. They're going to grab it and change it around and sell it back to you at hideously inflated prices. You'd be amazed how many prescription pharmaceuticals are actually just repackaging of things you can grow in your backyard. Valium, the most abused tranquilizer in the U.S. right now, is taken from the valerian plant. And you can get valerian root capsules at your local health food store without a prescription for considerably less than a Valium prescription costs. But what the medical industrial complex wants to do is take away your right to grow your own herbs in your own garden and take them for what ails you. You will go to a doctor to get a note. You will go to the pharmacy to buy their tinkered with patented products. Now that they can make money off of it, marijuana is going to be legalized. See, we already talked about the Fukushima prefecture shows wave of mutations. Now, if you're a Top Gear fan, and I am, this is going to be a funny story. As you know, the original presenters of Top Gear have gone on to do another show. I think it's over at Amazon, if I understand correctly. And BBC is trying to rebuild the show around new hosts, and their chief host is Chris Evans. And they've gone into production, and they have hit a major roadblock. Because, as you know, when the original hosts of Top Gear were reviewing a car, you would see them driving down the road, And they'd be talking to the camera and saying, this is really good, or it's really terrible, or the flappy paddles are too big, or whatever. And apparently, Chris Evans can't actually drive and talk into the camera at the same time. And you have to scratch your head, like before they named this guy to this top job, they didn't think to go on out and actually run a screen test, put him in a car with a camera, let him drive around the road and see how he actually presents. But apparently, because of the way Chris Evans is, he can't do it. And if anybody from Top Gear is listening to this broadcast, as a matter of fact, I can talk and drive at the same time. It's not that hard. Kind of makes you wonder what's going on over there. But they've hit a big snag on that one. All righty. Apparently, Macy's, following the disastrous holiday shopping season, is slashing their employees again. They're trying to blame the weather for it. Oh, it was horrible, horrible weather. We have to. No, it's because Americans don't have money anymore to buy things. They really, really don't. Once again, they're warning the polar vortex is going to bring cold weather to the U.S. this month. They're trying to make polar vortex sound like it's something unusual, so they don't have to admit that all of this caterwauling about snow being a thing of the past was, basically a hoax. It was. Let's see. Apparently 2 British boys were caught stealing artifacts from the Auschwitz grounds. Apparently security guards in the camp caught these boys picking up buttons, bits of a spoon, and they're looking at 10 years in jail. Which, in this case, I have to come down on the side of the security guards. It's an archaeological site. Even if the archaeology is being misrepresented for political gain, it's an archaeological site. Let's see, talked about... this is a good one. Getting on back to what's going on in Germany. The mayor of Cologne, which is where one of these worst assault riots happened on the New Year's, is out there saying the rape victims had it coming. You dressed too provocatively. I mean, that's nonsense. I thought we'd gotten away from this idea of blaming the victim because she dressed sexy, and us men are all completely beyond any control if we see a sexually dressed woman. It's absurd. Absolute absurd. Now, earlier in the week we were talking about this big stink where there was this plane going from Athens to Tel Aviv in which the Jewish passengers all stood up and demanded the 2 Palestinians on board be kicked off the plane. There were like 70 people, Israelis, standing there demanding these 2 Palestinians get off the plane and take another flight, which ultimately is what happened. The Palestinians said, we'll go, that's it. Now, can you imagine the lawsuits and the media outrage if a bunch of Palestinians on that plane had stood up and said, get the Israelis off? It's a good measure of the double standard, both in the law and the corporate media in reporting these issues. Okay, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, share what you know with everybody you know. Americans are starting to ask questions about what's been going on. Please be there with the answers for them. Talk to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.